Well, I can't help but feel like I've shot myself in the foot here, guys. I promised to go through the manifestos for each major party without thinking about the fact that I've just signed myself up to actually reading all the bloody things. The good news is I've read the whole 116-page fucker of a manifesto, and I'm going to break it down for you in a way that isn't completely stale. Please note, I will not cover every single thing, because if I did, I'd be breaking my promise of not being a completely boring dickhead. If you want a complete and thorough understanding of what exactly is in the full manifesto, I recommend you actually read the manifesto. This video is specifically for people that have an interest in politics but aren't complete virgins. Here's how it works. I'm going to cover a few key headers I think we all might be interested in, bullet point style. Then we'll wrap it up with my thoughts. Tomorrow we'll cover the Conservatives and Labour the day after that, so if you're not already subscribed, just get the inevitable out of the way so you don't miss out. Let's start with the economy. 1. They want to get back together with the EU. Not a controversial thing to say nowadays, but they would look to remove as many trade barriers as possible to allow us to work with our closest and largest trading partners once again. Their aim is to rejoin the single market at some point in the future. 2. Introduce a windfall tax on oil and gas companies. They're the ones that jammed their metaphorical balls up our metaphorical nostrils during COVID, so I'm totally fine with taxing the absolute dick out of them. It's implied later that this money will be used to support people living in fuel poverty in the UK. 3. Reversing tax cuts to banks. This is in reference to Rishi Sunak's idea when he was Chancellor. He thought it was an awesome idea to reduce the banking levy from 8% down to 3%. That's costing the UK about £6 billion over the next few years, so the Lib Dems have committed to reversing that cut. 4. Increasing the current tax on large social media corporations from 2% to 6%. Again, these companies make a shitload of money, so in times of need, it makes sense to ask a little more of the richest and most prosperous. Now those are the big guns, but there are a few other bits and bobs that are present that will help too. They've pledged to close tax loopholes, introduce plans to improve energy efficiency in homes, which we'll talk about in a second, and stop people from avoiding capital gains tax. They want to add levies to tobacco companies. They want to extend the sugar tax to milk and juice-based drinks that have excessive amounts of sugar too. Climate change. 1. They have pledged to make Britain's net zero targets by 2045. Our current target is 2050. 2. They will introduce a home energy upgrade programme to get low-income households updated. Better insulation, switching over to air source heat pumps, all of that good stuff. Improving their energy efficiency means it'll help low-income households financially as well as reducing emissions, so you're getting a bit of a double bubble. 3. They want to introduce what they call a general duty of care to apply to businesses. This means that businesses would be held accountable for being complete twats when it comes to the environment and human rights issues. They don't go into much more detail, but I imagine this would be fleshed out to protect from, say, water companies dumping literal tons of shit, or dumps if you will, into our rivers. 4. They would introduce a Chief Secretary for Sustainability in the Treasury. This is important because the Treasury is sort of upstream from the rest of the departments. The Treasury controls the money being spent, which brings with it an imbalance of power recognised by most political commentators. Having a high-ranking official in the Treasury representing sustainability should go some way to making sure that their goals aren't being stymied more than they already are. This is, of course, quite an aggressive plan, but it's in a I'm glad someone isn't actively trying to blow up the planet for profit kind of way. There would be levies placed on high carbon emission imports, more support for businesses to understand how to become more carbon neutral, all that good stuff. I'm not an economist and I'm not a climate scientist, but these plans all do seem like they would move us in the right direction, if a little bit ambitious. Healthcare. The pledges they make with regards to healthcare and social care are probably the strongest you're going to find from any of the large parties. If you don't know much about Ed Davey, his father died when he was a young boy. He was a young carer to his terminally ill mother, and is now a carer to his son. It's something he's obviously really passionate about, so I can't imagine these points would disappoint anyone that wants our health services looked after. 1. They would give you the right to see a GP or qualified staff member, nurses and stuff, within 7 days or 24 hours if it's urgent. 2. To make that achievable, they will hire 8,000 more GPs. 3. They will guarantee an NHS dentist for everyone needing urgent care. This might not sound too impressive, but if you haven't had the need for their services, let me tell you, the state of the NHS dentistry is absolutely abysmal. You simply cannot get an NHS dentist in some areas of the country, so this would prevent people from having to pay huge amounts to get urgent care from private practices, or even doing a bit of DIY string around the door handle kind of shit. 4. They want to introduce free personal care based on need rather than the patient's ability to pay. Personal care covers things like washing, dressing, shaving, using the bathroom, cooking, laundry, all the basic stuff you need to do on the day-to-day that is difficult or impossible with a disability. Now, there are many, many more policies outlined in this manifesto too. It's definitely the most developed, clear, and ambitious part of the document for me. They're scrapping VAT on children's toothbrushes and toothpastes. They want to introduce legislation to prevent children from easily getting hold of vapes, as well as banning disposable ones. They also want to flesh out the role of a carer in the UK, with proper paths for career progression, increasing carers' minimum wage by £2 an hour, and creating a Royal College of Care Workers to represent them. All in all, it's a lot of really exciting ideas, and in my opinion, basically smokes the shit out of the other party's healthcare plans. Defence. 1. They want to reverse cuts made by the Conservatives with the ambition of getting regular full-time troops back over 100,000 and reaching 2.5% of GDP spent on defence. To put that in perspective, we currently have 75,000 troops and we spend about 2.3% of our GDP on defence. 2. They will maintain our nuclear deterrent, but with the goal of achieving global disarmament. 3. They will introduce legislation that ensures there is a parliamentary vote before the UK engages its military. As the Lib Dems are big fans of being international and working together, they are committing to strengthening ties with our allies too. The Nordic, the Baltic, NATO, the EU, even the French get a nod here. Most importantly, they target retention by improving the standards of military housing, which is basically non-existent, and by placing a legal duty on the Defence Secretary and the government departments to maintain the Armed Forces Covenant. Now, as someone who left the Armed Forces because of the completely shitty working and living conditions, these are welcome first steps. Retention in the military is absolutely dire right now, and as with any other good business, it's almost always the people worth keeping that end up leaving. Education. 1. They would put a qualified mental health professional in every primary and secondary school. This is one of the plans funded by the tax on social media companies that we mentioned before. 2. They want to increase the funding per pupil above the rate of inflation. You might not know this, but outside of school meals and a lack of teachers, the buildings themselves are actually starting to crumble thanks to something called rack concrete. It's a really shitty, but more importantly really cheap building material used in the 50s, 60s and 70s. 3. They also want to reintroduce maintenance grants so students from low-income households can go into university without worrying about how they will afford to live. 4. Creating a lifelong skills grant, which would give all adults in the UK £5,000 to spend on education in their lifetime. They would increase this to £10,000 when things ease up a bit. Now, there's a lot of meat on the bones in this section, and it details plans not only to recruit teachers, but to retain them as well. They want to fund teacher training by allowing trainee roles to be paid. They want to reform Ofsted to, be useful. They also want to improve the levels of representation across the sector and would require every university to be fully transparent about their selection criteria. Housing. 1. The Lib Dems want to increase the building of homes to 380,000 a year, including 150,000 social homes. That's a fuckload of houses, more than both Labour and the Conservatives are promising. 2. They will ban no-fault evictions, make 3-year tenancies the default, and would create a national register of landlords. 3. They want to abolish residential leaseholds and would cap ground rent to prevent people from being extorted simply for owning a property with a leasehold that would end within their lifetime. Housing is, for most people in their 20s and 30s, the most important issue in this general election, and the Lib Dems really aren't fucking about. They want to substantiate their house building targets by creating 5 new garden cities. They want to protect renters from cowboy landlords with the register, and they also want to establish tenant panels so they have representation too when it comes to landlord governance. Immigration. 1. Scrap the Rwanda scheme. Obviously, it's stupid, it costs far too much money, delivers none of its promises, and exists solely as a Hail Mary in the hopes that it prevents people from crossing to the UK in the first place. It doesn't, because crossings are at an all-time high since it was passed. 2. They would introduce a dedicated unit to improve the speed and quality of decision-making on assessing asylum claims. That means that they could actually get on with clearing the backlog of people in the UK that have no right to stay in the UK. 3. They would lift the ban on asylum seekers working if they've been waiting longer than 3 months for a decision on their claim. That means that they will contribute to the economy while they wait and could support themselves. 4. They would begin working more closely with Europol and French authorities to stop traffickers enabling the Channel crossings. The long and short of this one is that they will scrap the wild west of conservative legislation and go back to a more traditional border enforcement setup. They want to make it easier for people to move between the UK and EU countries and help keep families together if workers come here to fill skill gaps like care working. They would also attempt to address the issue of social cohesion by funding community projects for refugees, and would reward the groups that develop innovative and successful ways to encourage social cohesion. Special sauce. Okay, now we're on to the X factors. This is the stuff that I haven't covered so far, but are worth bearing in mind because, at the very least, they're interesting and deserve your attention. 1. Legalise it. That's right, the Lib Dems want to legalise weed, otherwise known as the devil's lettuce, grass, pot, Mary Jane, marijuana, dank, cheddar, wacky backy, dope, hash, skunk, ganja, kush, reefer, green, zaza, platinum jack, whatever the fuck you want to call it, they want to legalise it. Legalising weed is a great idea. People smoke it all the time. It's readily available. Just legalise it and tax it. Create some jobs and some revenue. It's been proven to work basically everywhere that has legalised it, and it would also reduce some of the strain on the justice system, the prison system. Just do it. It's super simple. 2. Electoral reform. The Lib Dems have pledged to reform our electoral system from first past the post to one of proportional representation. It's something a lot of people, including me, are interested in seeing. It would transform our politics from a two-party system to allowing people to truly vote for the party they most agree with. Tactical voting is not something anyone wants to engage in, and this would help make sure voters are represented in safe seats, which at the moment basically guarantees that their vote will mean nothing. 3. They would also allow 16-year-olds to vote. This is apparently quite controversial for a lot of people, but I'm pretty confident it's only ever going to result in a fairer and more representative democratic result for the country. At the end of the day, if you're old enough to get taxed and/or have your plans for higher education and its financing decided upon, you should be able to vote for or against it. To suggest otherwise is simply unfair. Okay, so that's about everything we're going to cover on policies and the manifesto. Again, if you want to know more, please just take the time to read the manifesto. The Lib Dems themselves have several different versions, including an easy read version, so if this video has piqued your interest, please do just go and have a gander. It's all linked in the description. In my opinion, this is a very good manifesto. They say the manifesto is fully costed, and they do provide some figures, but I'm not an economist, so I won't act like I could ever possibly call bullshit on anyone's spending plans. Broadly speaking, they want to increase taxes on corporations and bankers and energy companies to pump money into the NHS, defence, and tackling childcare and child poverty. While I think their chances are basically nil of getting into government at this election, what this manifesto does very well is put a huge amount of pressure on Labour to actually do something left-wing. If they can get a decent amount of MPs elected, which they're on track to do, it'd be a really strong learning point for Labour to start scooching over to the left again. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll catch you tomorrow where we will cover the Conservative Manifesto. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please do like and subscribe, it really helps. As always, a big shout out to my delectable and virtuous supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so from just £1 a month. The link is in the description. Love you. Bye bye.